going on YouTube? This is Ronan Joe Genji representing Ronan Joe Chronicles, and I'm back with another review of episode 2 of AMC's Eli Roth's History of Horror. This episode is about slashers. This is part 1 of slashers. And I like this episode because this is the genre where I really started to sink my teeth into the horror, horror realm, or if you will. And I really got into horror when I was like a teenager, like around 12, 13. And, I saw the films like Black Christmas, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. The films that really set the pinnacle and raised the bar for the genre that we have and love today. And I started to realize when I was watching this episode, going back, how much the slasher genre has so much originality and creativity and the stuff that we call cliche and tropes. And that time back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, that was when it was invented and that was when it was fresh. So it was kind of cool, like the metaphors and the phrases that we take for granted today and say that we're tired of was a fresh, awesome thing then. And I love that those subgenre movies took things like making a movie take place on a specific holiday, having the final girl, the main characters, just being some whacked out teenagers, the slut, the jock, the party girl, the virgin, you know what I'm saying? The band geek, you know what I'm saying? And then, you got the detective, then you got the wholesome, picket fences family, the mom and dad are kind of naive and don't really know what's going on with their kids. They just let them do whatever. And then you got the brother and sister and things like that. So you have a lot of things where they kind of explore that, and then they do other things where sometimes, the regular, wholesome human being can be the monster itself, and it kind of explored a lot of things as far as like giving us like that real-time horror, then kind of giving us the psychological thriller, then giving us a straight-up slasher on the holiday, or sometimes making the movie have that documentary-like feel to it, but still looking at the movie not as people in it as actors, but looking at them as people. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was amazing for doing that because that movie looked like we were watching something live, raw footage of something that was left behind, of the final moments of these young teenagers' lives on camera. And I still ask the question to this day, did Tobe Hooper hire these people off the street? Because crazy people can truly act, you know what I'm saying? I just thought it was great. And in this episode, also, you get insight from Jamie Lee Curtis, director Tom Holland, director Lee Winnell, comedian actor Little Rel Howery, who was also on Get Out. Robert Englund gives some insight onto his perspectives on the horror genre and what he did. There's a few other people, some Fangoria editors and other like novel authors and stuff like that. And it was really interesting how they talked about, creating impact as far as being the first to pave the way for the genre, doing things out of the ordinary, making movies for cheap, giving movies that distinct style and that look, where everyone thought that, because your movie didn't make money or, you were attacking women, there's a big controversy, argument with the horror genre that's been going on for decades, and I still feel like horror genre really gets attacked and gets disrespected for a lot of the wrong reasons, and most of it is really just out of confusion for people who aren't really horror purists but want to attack something just because they want to be a part of something. Critics and protesters did this a lot back in the days, but they were saying like movies like Maniac, Silence of the Lambs, the Friday the 13th films kind of objectified women and disrespected them, and they hated women. But in reality, when you look at those films of the 70s and 80s, you came up with the saying, the final girl. There was always a final girl that was a survivor. She was strong, smart, and intelligent. She was a fighter. And then you had the dead teenager genre. You know what I'm saying? That kind of explored, teenagers being hunted down. But you had some dumb teenagers, and you had some smart ones. And then you had the, I guess, what do you call it? Well, it wasn't Mary Sue at the time, but the damsel in distress. But sometimes the damsel in distress had things to do, So it was interesting, like looking at the roles women had in those movies back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s paved the way for the strong and empowerment women we have today. Sometimes they were cliche, but at the time, it was really creative. And I hate the fact that those actresses and women that played those roles didn't get the credit that they deserve. They're looked at as just objects, which is all wrong. Because when you look at those horror movies, that genre is really exploring the horrors and fears of through the eyes of a woman, and how they have to live their daily lives by being alert at all times, looking over their shoulders, they have to, be certain whereas to where men we're prepared and fight back, sometimes women don't have that luxury, and I'm not saying all, I'm saying some, but horror movies explores that fears, those fantasies, that suspense, and just that idea of putting it in the back of your mind, like, hey, be aware, but it's okay to be scared, but have fun at the same time. Horror movies touched on subjects where it was okay to break the rules and talk about certain things because you were around people, you were around the audience, and you were in a safe environment. So it was almost kind of like a learning experience in a sense, you know what I'm saying? To see other people go through traumatic events and go through psychological events, but that's not me on camera, but I'm not going to go through that. I'm glad that isn't me, you know what I'm saying? You're looking at that. You're looking at someone else go through trauma, going through a turmoil and going through a crisis, and it's entertaining until it happens to you. You know what I mean? So it's very interesting. It's like foreshadowing, and it's like art imitating life and life imitating art. But I feel like women have a huge place in horror, and they have a huge impact on horror as far as being the stars in a horror movie, writing and directing horror films. They've come a long way, and it's really time to acknowledge that. And I like that this episode really showed the beginning of the slasher, the middle of the slasher, and at its peak of where we are today. And I feel like in the 70s and 80s was really picked off, and they saw that it could be a franchise no matter what it was, that you can create iconic villains that are likable, iconic villains that are, unknown, mysterious, nonchalant, but have a menacing presence without talking and speaking. And I thought that was cool because you get insight to how these villains were created and how they came about and how the actors that were behind the mask played these characters. And it's very interesting because the most beloved characters, Freddy, all have their own distinct personalities. Like Michael was the shape, right? He didn't talk, but he had heavy breathing, and he was like the wind. He can be anywhere. But he had this zombie-like walk, and he moves like a man. He kills like a man, but he was more of a monster. Jason, he's killing people that wronged his mother, and she was killing because they let him drown. So he comes back as this unnatural, like supernatural force in a hockey mask, who's jacked like a WWF wrestler. It was crazy. And the teenagers that he's hunting down have zero personality. They're just basically set up to die. But the killer has more personality than them. Then you got Freddy Krueger, who has a dark comedic personality, pretty disturbing, child murderer, but he's able to go into your dreams. He has personality. He enjoys what he's doing, which is really sick, but he has a likable charm to where you want to see him in action, but you also want to see him get killed and destroyed at the same time. Freddy bridged that gap between a love and hate type of villain. We loved Freddy, but we hated him because he can be anywhere at any time. Like, it was kind of tough to fight him. Then you take the most innocent thing in the world, a child and his toy, Chucky. You know what I'm saying? That was another slasher. They start targeting children in the mid '80s. Through action figures and I guess child consumerism. It was very interesting. And that's a scary thing because you take something that's so innocent, that's part of a kid's life, which is a toy that they love and they cherish and it's precious to them. And then you take that and you put a monster inside the toy. And now the toy becomes a personality of a human being, which is pretty frightening. So it was like Slasher's a game changer, man. And then you get to the 90s and then you talk about Scream, which really resurrected the genre. And it kind of explored the genre and it exposed it too, with the cliches, the tropes, the parody. Not so much of a spoof, but it was self-aware, and that was another term that was created. Wes Craven created the self-aware genre into the slasher thing. He exposed everything, all the rules, how to survive, the ways you would get killed for breaking rules. Doing this, you can't do this. There's certain things to the formula. Being the final girl, having the crazy psychotic boyfriend, that one kid that was watching all the horror movies and figured things out. I mean, the slasher genre did so many things. You would consider it unoriginal in today's era and that everyone's copycatting. But in the 80s, slashers were copycatting the peak movies that created the original stuff. Like, you got a lot of copycat movies in the 80s, but some of those copycat slasher movies were still fun. And they were cheesy though, but they just embraced it. They said, hey, you know what? The door's been open. We're just going to make it. We're not going to really try to do nothing original like that. We're going to capitalize on what works. And that was a great thing. And so I'm grateful for those movies like Maniac, Scream, Happy Birthday to Me, My Bloody Valentine, Final Exam, Slumber Party Massacre, Silent Night, Deadly Night. You know what I'm saying? Those movies opened the door. But one of my big criticisms with this episode was that they didn't really talk about Final Destination. And in a sense, I think Final Destination is kind of like a slasher movie with reality, freak accident horror. And it's kind of a nod and tip of the hat to the dead teenager genre. Final Destination was successful. It was creative and it was original. It did have some of the cliche characters, but they were smart. They were cliche characters, but they were smart characters. And the idea of being hunted down by the Grim Reaper and things like that, and the theme was basically about not being able to cheat death. You think that because you walked away from the scene of a crime or you did somebody wrong, death comes back and it hunts you in the order that you originally died. And it talks about basically death has a design for every person that walks the earth. It was interesting, man. And I kind of look at that as more of a real world slasher on, I guess, reality, just being at the wrong place at the wrong time, because freak accidents are real. Freak accidents can happen if you're not paying attention. If you're caught slipping for a second, you can go like that. So it was kind of weird that they didn't address Final Destination in this episode. But our job has a huge impact on the genre that we love today, and I feel like it's definitely going to come back based on the Halloween movie we just got, and Money Talks. But slashers then was at a time where people didn't want it, people were protesting it, people were against it. They said it's misogyny, it's disrespectful, it's offensive, and then you find out who is the moral majority of the audience. Who are these people that are buying tickets and buying the Blu-rays and stuff? And most of that percentage is going to women. There's a lot of women in the horror world that love horror movies and that are watching these too. So you got to look at that, and then 50-60% of us are kind of in that. I guess we're kind of in that category. But horror's huge. It's like the superhero genre of today, but it's mixed. Everyone used to think that it was only men that was watching horror movies. Nah, women are watching it too. So it's an expression of them too. They have something to say. Everyone has something to say about it. And horror can be viewed in different ways. It's all about how you analyze it, how you critique it, and how you visualize it, because everybody has different levels of horror and everyone has different horrifying experiences. Everybody has a story to tell, so we all can relate to it in different ways. But there's one or two things that we can all relate to as far as this episode talked about. We all are afraid of things, we all bleed, and we all have a dark side. You know what I'm saying? So the slasher can be anybody. And in slasher movies, you never know what to expect, because it can be your best friend, your next door neighbor, someone that you thought was your friend, somebody at your job, or the new family that just moved in next door. Slashers can go any direction, and it's great. You can set it on a holiday. You can base it on a true story. You can give it that documentary feel. It could be a murder mystery. You know what I'm saying? It could be anything. But I'm grateful for the slasher genre, and after watching this episode, I definitely want to see more slasher films, and I think we're going to see a big return of slasher movies. I truly believe that. Shout outs to Blumhouse for the Halloween film. And yeah, that's pretty much my take on episode 2 of Slashers. Anyway, let me know what you guys thought in the comment section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And thank you for tuning in to Ronan Joe Chronicles. You can follow on Facebook, Ronan Joe Chronicles Network, Instagram, Ronan Joe Chronicles, Twitter, Ronan Joe NG85. And as always, stay tuned for the next one. But for now, it's lights out. Peace. And I will be back to review part 2 of Slashers. Alright, I'm out, y'all. Peace.